Mark DiPlacido, I was wondering about the politics of this. So everyone is running around, freaking out, upset. It's like Judy Garland died all over again. The Wall Street Journal, apoplectic. CNBC, the financial nets, certainly all of the income. And the interesting thing is it's not just the Never Trump media, somewhat overdone to turn, with a few exceptions, but if you look, the Senate actually took a purely ceremonial vote to deny Trump the power to enact these tariffs unilaterally. And it was every single Democrat. He picked up 3 or 4 Republicans, Murkowski, Collins, Cocaine Mitch, Rand Paul, but every Democrat. And I'm old enough to remember, started following politics, I guess, late 80s. I was precocious. In the 90s, when Democrats actually wanted to defend American industry and said, no, wait, so this isn't actually free trade. Some of these guys are doing unfair things. And even Ronald Reagan, actually, Plaza Accords sort of recognized that that free trade wasn't free trade. Anyway, the politics. Do you think, it was a noteworthy event that the pinko who runs the AFL-CIO, Sean, I forget his last name, and this guy is not Jimmy Hoffa, who might occasionally endorse a Republican. He's not even George Maney, who's like a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, always Democrat, New Dealer, but could be reasonable. This guy is left. But he actually came out and said something nice about Trump. He said that of course this will help American car manufacturers if you're going to make more stuff in America, sort of by definition. So, you sit there, you're at American Compass, and you see all of the tanks. Heritage is sort of trying to find Jesus after a long time of just, no, free trade, even though we tell you this is not free trade. Cato, nuts. AEI, to the extent anyone ever thinks or hears about it anywhere, is nuts. The Wall Street Journal editorial page, nuts. National Review, can't believe they even still publish that. Do you see a change in the politics here? And are you surprised that no Democrats seem to be coming along so far?
Yeah, so I saw last night that the White House put together a list of dozens and dozens of favorable statements on the policy. I haven't had time to read them all, but I saw a ton of congressional members on there, including the speaker. I think obviously this is the policy and this is the outlook, right, that gave the president that competitive advantage over a field of 17 other well-known, many highly qualified candidates back in 2016. And the Republican base has been digesting as much of, the free market orthodoxy as anybody over the last 30 or 40 years, since the Reagan administration. And I think his nomination in 2016 showed that there is a deeper base a deeper concern with the national interest than with some sort of free market orthodoxy that people in DC and on the coast that consider themselves Republican or right wing have sort of calcified over the last 30 years. I think we saw even with Reagan, right? Like he took action to save the auto industry in 1981, right? After the oil glut in the 70s started favoring these Japanese cars, the big three were under a lot of pressure and they were in a lot of trouble, right? And Reagan stepped in and said, Japan has to put in a tariff rate quota. They have a limit on the number of cars they can import. Of course, if they want to build factories here and sell into the market, they're welcome to do that. And that's exactly what we did. And we saw, hundreds of thousands of jobs spring up in the United States. The other domestic manufacturing benefited from shared technology and innovation and investment poured into the country. And now I think to this day, Toyota and Honda are 2 cars with the highest domestic content of any other vehicles. So, there's plenty of precedent even in other, more free market administrations to recognize when you've reached the end of the rope and the national interest is more important than the interests of multinational corporations that are happy to sell out our workers and, the future of innovation to other countries. I think on the left, I guess I'm surprised that maybe, at least Fetterman didn't jump over and say that this is actually a good thing. I think he's been surprisingly extremely reasonable over the last, 6 months or so. Bernie Sanders, I think he's, he's more interested in politics than he is in the core of his message at this point. I think that's been evident since he, let Biden get the nomination in 2020. I think the Democrats are they're at a point where, they're so lost and they don't have a message that the only thing still that they have after 5 years of basically running the same playbook is, casting the president as evil and standing in line to oppose him no matter what he does, which is unfortunate because I do think certainly intellectually and certainly politically, there are Democrats that still, at least in theory, support the middle and working class the way they used to, coming out of the FDR wave, But I think that Democrat Party overall, and if you look at the party apparatus, you look at the Biden administration, the way it was run, and you look at the Harris campaign, that's not the core of their party anymore. And they might still have the leadership of some of these unions, but the membership is definitely swung to the president. And I think we're going to continue to see things move in that direction.
Richie Torres this morning was on Twitter, trying to walk the middle line, because here's a guy who's a Puerto Rican, trying to run for governor in a state that basically has been decimated, New York, by, loss of manufacturing. I drive up to Canada, the Niagara area, Ontario, 7 or 8 times a year. I go through Elmira. I take the back roads because they're kind of pretty from time to time, but the poverty up there and the loss of industry up there is phenomenal. Buffalo is a hellhole of giant factories that they're constantly trying to get people to come to, but there's no industry there. My other issue with all of this, with this reindustrialization, is first of all on the politics. The simple fact of the matter is they really don't like the working class anymore. And I think that has to do a lot with, and I'll get in trouble here, I think it has to do a lot with what I call the elite feminization of the party, the Democrats. The fact of the matter is their key demographic now is college-educated women. And that's a lot of French literature. That's a lot of education degrees. That's a lot of non-manufacturing positions. These are people women who are basically not connected with the economy in terms of production and manufacturing or anything, and they drive policy. And it's the reason why you see the comments that you see. I was watching Maria Cantrell, and I've never seen somebody just more, she's got Boeing up there, but her position on Boeing is like, well, we're a special elite manufacturer that makes airplanes, not like these other people down here. I mean, that was really her position. And I think even CNBC kind of sensed that, and they didn't call her out on it, but I mean, they brought it up, that it made it obvious. But the real thing to me with the politics here is that when you start to go out there, and I hope the Trump administration keeps pounding on this, I'm not sure that Levitt's the one to do it. I think they need to find someone else to do it. I think Navarro does a good job and some other people, but they need to go out there and can tell people the biggest problem that I have myself with all the loss of this manufacturing is what Mark pointed out earlier, and that's the loss of expertise. In other words, we are losing generations of people who cannot work in factories, who do not know how to fix things, who basically are completely at the mercy of essentially foreigners to make different things. It's kind of like almost agriculture has become that way. People basically think a refrigerator is how food is made. In other words, you open the refrigerator and then you close it at night and magically something shows up with DoorDash or something like that. Right. But the real problem that we have is we're losing this expertise. And when you go to certain places like Purdue University, where my kids go, is a good example. They're trying to regain this expertise in manufacturing of semiconductors. You know what the problem is? They don't have a lot of people. So who do they have to go get? They have to go get Koreans, Taiwanese, Chinese. They have to go get these people to teach American kids what to do. Because, we have some really smart designers in Silicon Valley, but it's a real issue. It's one of the reasons I have quite a few problems with the H-1B visa. I think in many ways that pulls that we we're not educating people because it's just easier for these global companies to say, hey, we'll just go bring in some talent. We won't try to train it up. Our education system is not going in that direction because you look at who our educators are. My son goes to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology. He's not a designer. He's a production guy. In other words, he's sitting in there looking at machines that cut and things like that. FIT was founded. It's a fascinating place. It was founded for the garment industry of the United States, completely. And they still have a pretty good focus on that. But what are most of their majors now instead of what they're turning out garment manufacturers? They're turning out marketing people, digital people, digital advertising people, designers who they all, designers, 1,000 of them come in and then they graduate 50 that can even work someplace. But it's all these jobs that I think essentially if you had production jobs, you'd be doing quite well. There's a couple of garment guys I know I'm not invested in them right now, but they constantly have trouble getting workers. If you buy shoes, Allen Edmonds, they're made in the U.S. It's tough for them to get workers up there in Wisconsin who can work on these things. One of the things is on when you talk about manufacturing, Terry Guh from Foxconn, if you remember the Wisconsin deal years ago, well, I spend a lot of time in Taiwan. I know a lot of those guys. One of the things that they were shocked, and TSMC is having the same problem in Arizona, they can't get people who can operate in these factories and in these systems. And the workflow is just different. And in other words, all the Americans complain, they do it so differently, they're this and that. But the problem is we're trying to take, I hate to say it, French lit majors are people who are trained academically in a different way because we don't have anybody from the manufacturing and production world training our people anymore. It's the reason why that guy, Mike Rowe, with his little welding school, it's hilarious. The guy's got like this. I mean, basically, you go to one of his welding schools or whatever it is for 2 years, you come out making $80,000 a year, and that number only goes up. And guess what? It's like you said, it's a job that's, it's 40 hours a week plus some overtime, and you have a real life. You can go live someplace and go to places. So I really think what's happening is in the politics of it. I think Trump's the first guy who could really articulate that. That's my belief. I think a lot of people have been thinking this for years, and I think the Democrats, they can't articulate it anymore because, Kristen, you pointed out, who's the head of the American Auto Workers Union? Basically, it's a liberal arts major who essentially, I don't know if he ever worked in a factory or not, but it's like a lot of the union guys you meet down at the AFL-CIO building about 3 blocks from the White House. These are not working guys. These are guys with master's degrees in public affairs or master's ideologues in turning out the vote. And they've sucked them all up. And so I think it's a real issue. But I think what Mark and the team are doing there, I think they're the first ones, and Lighthouser as well, and some of the other ones, Lapp and Mark and some other, are the first ones who are really articulating this. And I think people are catching on.